everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to give it one more moment for more folks to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us for the PCI Express PCIe 6.0 specification, the interconnect of I/O needs of the future webinar. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. I'd like to introduce you to Debendra Das Sharma, who is the PCI SIG board member and also the Director of I/O Technology and Standards Group at Intel. And then I'll go ahead and pass it off to him.
Thank you. Thanks. My name is Debendra Das Sharma, and I hope everyone is doing fine and healthy and safe. PCI Express 6.0 specification is under development, and it's currently at Ref 0.5 level. So some of the information I'm going to present today is subject to change in the final revision of the specification. Here is an agenda for today. Looks like there is nothing being shown on the screen. Okay. Anyway, while you're taking care of that, let me at least talk through the agenda here. First, we'll provide an introduction to PCI SIG. It is the organization that develops PCI Express and the interconnect technology. Then we will discuss the evolution of data rates in PCI Express. We are going to cover key metrics and requirements for PCI 6.0. Next, we will go through some of the basics around PAM4 signaling and assumptions around the errors that we will encounter with PAM4. Then we are going to discuss error correction and detection strategies we will be deploying for PCI 6.0. These include forward error correction, known as FEC, cyclic redundancy check, known as CRC, as well as link level retry or replay to eventually the correct errors that have been detected by the CRC. We are going to go through all of those. Then we are going to introduce the flick mode that we are going to have for PCI Express 6.0. We will also cover the low power enhancements in PCI 6.0. And after that, we'll circle back to the key metrics that we will talk about, and we'll just see how well we are doing. Finally, we will conclude with a call to action. PCI stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect. SIG stands for Special Interest Group. So PCI SIG is a consortium of 800 plus member companies. PCI SIG owns and manages PCI Express, also known as PCIe in short, as an open industry standard. This interconnect technology is backed by a robust compliance program and frequent workshops. So member companies can submit their products for interoperability and compliance testing, and this helps with the seamless plug and play capabilities. Over time, PCI Express architecture has demonstrated its ability to adapt to revolutionary as well as evolutionary trends in the entire compute continuum, spanning a wide range of platforms that includes cloud computing, edge computing, automotive, artificial intelligence, analytics, telcos, storage, consumer segment, mobile computing, data center, high performance computing, supercomputing. Pretty much everything that is from a handheld to the most sophisticated supercomputer, everybody has PCI Express. Every year, the directors of the PCI SIG board And the current set of board of directors are shown here. So now let's look into PCI Express layering of the architecture and how it modularizes things. PCI is a layered architecture where each layer has a well-defined functionality. So the functionality of each of these layers has remained unchanged through the evolution of the technology. This allows for each of the layers to evolve independently with full backward compatibility, and that makes technology transitions really seamless. On the top is the software layer. It provides a standard interface for the underlying hardware, irrespective of the type of the device that you have. And full plug and play is accomplished through this model, whether it is a BIOS or a virtual machine monitor, VMM, or an operating system. They can discover the device through this standardized configuration and discovery mechanism of PCI Express. After discovery, it can load the device driver software that is associated with that device, and that device driver software abstracts the device-specific behavior when it interfaces with system software such as OS. The transaction layer offers a fully packetized split transaction protocol, and it is designed to deliver the maximum link efficiency. We have a very well-defined producer-consumer ordering model that defines how hardware interfaces with software for ensuring data consistency. We have virtual channels to ensure quality of service. We have credit mechanism for flow control. Next comes the data link layer. It provides reliable data transport through a combination of CRC and link level retry. The physical layer is responsible for link training, encoding, scrambling, all the analog functions. All of those are handled by the electrical and the logical file layer. So we have one stack that covers the entire specification, everything from the file layer all the way up to software. But in spite of that, we support multiple form factors that is listed below called mechanical, and that is expected because PCI Express goes across such a wide range of platforms. Now, due to the ubiquity of PCI Express and the resulting economies of scale with 800 plus member companies, you can get a lot of off-the-shelf IP blocks from multiple suppliers, and this frees up resources so that companies can innovate using their own value-added IP. Now, let's quickly take a look at some of the form factors that we use. BGA is used in small and thin platforms. M.2 is the smallest footprint. It's used for boot and compact storage devices. U.2 is used for SSDs with hot plug capabilities. CHEM stands for card electromechanical. It's the most widely used form factor. It has got various width and height combinations, and it supports a wide range of power profiles spanning 25 watts to excess of 300 watts for things like GPUs, graphics, etc. SD Express is prevalent in the IoT, automotive, and handheld segments. Small form factor is another set of form factors that are becoming really popular for large storage appliances used in the data center. Now let's look at the evolution of PCI Express, a technology we all love and together have made it very successful. PCI Express debuted in 2003 with PCIe 1.0 specification, as you can see in the table there. It has evolved through 5 generations, currently moving to the 6th generation, as you can see there. We double the data rate every generation while maintaining full backwards compatibility. So if you look into the table, 1.0 started, it was at 2.5 gig, had 8-bit NB encoding. So the resulting bandwidth that you got for a by16 link or a by16 device is at 32 gigabit per second. Then comes the 2.0, which is at 5 gigabit per second. Again, 8-bit NB encoding. 2007 it came out, 64 gigabit per second. 3.0 came in 2010. It was at 8 gig, but it used 128B, 130B encoding. So as a result, you got 126 gigabit per second, still doubled. 4.0 was at 16 gigabit per second, and we got 252 gigabit per second net aggregate bandwidth. That came out in 2017. 5.0 was at 32 gigabit per second. It came 2 years after that in 2019. Double the data rate again, the bandwidth again. And 6.0, which is work in progress, it is going to have 64 gigabit per second, supposed to come out next year. and it will deliver 1 terabit per second of bandwidth. Now, because of this transitions that we are doing in a backwards compatible manner, we are supporting a wide range of applications in a fully backwards compatible manner with power efficiency. PCI Express has become the ubiquitous I/O across the entire compute infrastructure, everything from handheld to the supercomputer like we talked about. So if I step back, in my opinion, an interconnect technology is successful if we can sustain 3 generations of bandwidth increase that spans a decade. When we started PCI Express back in 2000, early 2000, we had a similar goal. Clearly, we have far exceeded that goal with the technology evolving in a backwards compatible manner. For now, we are at the 6th generation, spanning 2 decades. And all the while, this technology has thrived through the multiple compute revolutions that we have had during this time. And we have seen things like handheld devices emerge, cloud computing becoming ubiquitous, IoT becoming mainstream. All of these are significant revolutions in the compute landscape, and we have thrived as the interconnect technology of choice through these. So this speaks to the level of innovations that we have to keep this technology relevant. There seems to be a question, Megan, which is around the... Yeah, go ahead.
The first question is, at what level of maturity is PCI 6.0 specification?
PCI 6.0 specification is currently at Rev 0.5 level of maturity, and after that we are working on 0.7. After 0.7 we will be at 0.9 and then 1.0, which will be the 1.0, the final level specification should be out next year. Okay, so then the question is, okay, what's driving this speed increase? When you look at the compute landscape today, we have a lot of new and emerging applications, cloud, automotive, AI, those are emerging, while the existing ones like enterprise, PC, IoT, handheld, storage, all of them are demanding even more memory, more storage, more interconnect bandwidth. So all of these in turn are driving the demand for faster data processing and data movement across different entities in the platform that are interconnected through PCI Express. These usages are driving new innovations, which in turn is enabling more usage model, and this is leading to the virtuous cycle of more compute, more communications, more interconnect bandwidth. So what we are seeing is on the device side, networking is going to move to 800 gig in the early 2020s. That will need 64 gig. Accelerators have an insatiable demand for bandwidth. PCI Express, because it is ubiquitous, a number of alternate protocols are such as the ones delivering cache coherency or memory protocols are using PCI Express PHY as the medium of transfer. And PCI Express supports all of these alternate protocols that run on PCI PHY because this enables platforms to remain cost effective. You can use the same pins, you can repurpose them, or the same connectors, you can repurpose them for either connecting to I/O or connecting to those alternate protocols. And this results in a lot of cost efficiency in the platform level. But because of all of these, we are getting a huge demand for the bandwidth as well as the low latency that is inherent in PCI Express, a lot of PCI Express applications, as well as in these alternate protocols. So while all of these are good and it's challenging for us to keep moving at this faster cadence, of late we are moving into a 2-year cadence for doubling the bandwidth, we need to keep our eye on what has made us ubiquitous, and it is the cost effectiveness that we offer, it is the performance that we offer, it is the power efficient performance that we offer, and it is the ability to scale to hundreds of lanes in a platform while keeping high volume manufacturing requirements intact. So with all of these, we cannot lose sight of that, and we need to still keep innovating. So that's basically the foundation on which PCI Express 6.0 is based. So now let's take a look into what are the key metrics for PCI Express 6.0. Before we start embarking on a technology transition, we always keep the key metrics in mind. And as you will look through this, you'll see that none of these requirements that are listed here are really negotiable. They're all important. The data rate needs to be at 64 gig. We are deciding to move to PAM4 signaling rather than the NRZ that we are used to, and that is done so that the channel reach can still remain almost similar to what we have in Gen 5. The general expectation is that you can reach about 12 inches on the motherboard with broadly used materials, because remember, we have to scale to hundreds of lanes, so we cannot use exotic stuff. And you're going to have a connector, and then you're going to put a Gen 6 add-in card, which will have a trace length of about another 3 to 4 inches. And we want to be able to do all of these without using a retimer. And of course, for longer channels, which also exist, we are going to use retimers to extend the channel reach. So that's the goal. In terms of latency, we have a very strict latency goal. We cannot increase the latency by more than a single-digit nanoseconds over 32 gig. And in a lot of applications, that number really needs to go to 0. PCI Express is a load store architecture. It is used for memory coherency applications along with a lot of the standard PCI load store architecture. In a lot of them, even a nanosecond increase in latency will have visible performance impact. So while PAM4 has been adopted by other standards such as networking, they do not have this level of strict performance metrics. So their FEC latency, if you look at it, is in the 100 plus nanoseconds range. And for us, that is simply a non-starter. We would rather stay at the lower speed than go to a higher speed and pay 100 plus nanosecond FEC latency, because it just doesn't work for our applications. So it's a huge challenge for us to make sure that we are staying within the latency targets. We always love a challenge as an industry, and we will, as you will see, that we have some fairly good ways of getting around those. And again, it is needed because we are such a ubiquitous load store interface. From a bandwidth inefficiency point of view, we cannot again afford to lose more than 2% of real bandwidth when we move from 5.0 to 6.0, in spite of having a FEC. And that's because not only do we want to double the data rate, but also we want to get at least very close to 2x of real bandwidth. So we just do not have the luxury of losing, let's say, like a 12% bandwidth due to FEC, as some others have done. Reliability is paramount for us, especially given the hundreds of lanes and in server kind of deployment. And we have a reliability metric called FEC, which called FIT, which is the failure in time. It is the number of failures that we get in 10 to the power 9 hours. So for a by 16 link, we want the FIT to be significantly less than 1, but very close to 0. Now our power efficiency needs to be better than Gen 5. That way we are better in terms of picojoule per bit than prior generations. We will be introducing a new low power state to consume power that is proportionate to bandwidth consumption while maintaining the efficiency of existing low power mechanisms. Overall, as we develop PCI 6.0 in a backwards compatible manner, we will be preserving the cost effectiveness, scalability, and ability to be deployed in high volume manufacturing environment. That's critical for us. Now let's take a look into how PAM4 signaling works. PAM4 stands for pulse amplitude modulation. So if you look at the picture on the right, there are 4 voltage levels in the same unit interval. So you got 3 eyes as is shown there. Now the encodings are 00, 01, 11, 10. It's gray coded for getting less errors. And the voltage levels are also shown in the table below. So what PAM4 does is it helps with the channel loss because we are operating at the same Nyquist frequency as the prior data rate at 32 gig. However, because we got 3 eyes, we are going to have reduced eye height and reduced eye width because we are on the same UI, you got 3 eyes there. So the bit error rate or BER will be several orders of magnitude higher with PAM4 than we are used to, which is 10 to the power minus 12 bit error rate. And that will move us to adopting a kind of FEC that we will talk about. We will also be doing pre-coding across successive unit intervals in order to minimize the burst errors. Now let's look at our error assumptions and the characteristics. We define something called FBER, the first bit error rate. It's the probability that the first bit error occurs at a receiver. As you can see in lane number 0 in the picture, there is a first bit that flips. Now, because the first bit flips, and because we have adopted DFE, which is decision feedback equalizer, depending on the data that you get, you are going to see subsequent UIs potentially have errors, and that is known as a burst error. So a single error on a lane is going to most likely propagate into a burst. And we try to reduce the burst in the specification by constraining certain parameters like the DFE tap weights, which basically we are trying to get to a reasonable balance between the transmitter equalization, the type of CTLE circuitry you would deploy, and how much you get out of DFE equalization. So that's one aspect that we are working on, and we have some good solutions for. The second aspect in terms of the error correlation that we need to be cognizant of is the errors that are happening because of common sources of error, like power supply noise happens. So lane 0 gets an error, which means that most likely lane 15 could also have an error. Maybe lane 3 also could have an error because they are coming from the same common noise sources. So it's fundamentally the conditional probability that a first error in a lane, in this case lane 0, also means there are errors in nearby lanes. So it's those three things that are important to us. And bit error rate is basically a combination of FBER, the correlation of error you get on the lane, and also the correlation of errors that you are going to get across lanes. So then, now that we have established that we are going to get a much higher error rate with the PAM4 signaling, let's see what we can do to deal with them. And what's a good metric to use for evaluation? There are two mechanisms to correct errors. One is error correction through forward error correction, FEC. And it's well known that the latency and complexity increases exponentially with the number of symbols that we correct. This is due to the due to the number of permutations that you get, right? And that's a well-known thing. More number of symbols that are in error, you are going to get basically, if k errors are there, you get n choose k per number of permutations, and then within each symbol you get 2 to the power x, x being the number of bits in the symbol, to the power k, right? So it's an exponential set of things, and you need to be able to, from the syndrome, go and evaluate for each and every one of them. So it's an exponential problem. Detection, on the other hand, is done by CRC, and it is a linear problem because all that you're checking is, did I get a zero syndrome or did I get a non-zero syndrome? So if you deploy n CRC symbols, you can detect up to n symbols in errors. In PCI Express, once you detect an error, if you didn't correct the error through FEC, if you detect an error, it is going to result in a link level retry. And this mechanism, CRC, and then resulting in a link level retry has been there in PCI Express since Gen 1 days. And it is a strength of PCI Express, which we fully want to deploy. So we look at correction as the combination of the two, correction and then detection resulting in correction through replay. Now that we will use two metrics for evaluation. The first one is related to performance. It's the probability of retry or the bandwidth loss due to retry. They are the same thing, two sides of the same coin. And the first one is related to latency and bandwidth loss, which is performance. The second one is fit, which we have talked about before, which is related to the reliability. So for achieving our performance goals, as I said, we will need both FEC and we will use retry for correction. While other standards have only deployed FEC, and consequently they have paid very high overhead in terms of latency penalty in the excess of 100 nanoseconds and bandwidth overhead to top it. We will follow this unique approach of using a lightweight FEC. We want to keep that FEC overhead to be linear, as we will see. And we want to basically get to a retry probability with that FEC to an acceptable level with no noticeable performance impact. And then we are going to use the link level retry by trying to keep that replay latency also really low. So we basically want to take advantage of this and result in a better performing link. We do have a very audacious goal. I want to acknowledge that. We want to keep our FEC correction and detection latency to less than 2 nanoseconds in order to meet the performance needs of the load store IO interconnect. So the question is, how do we go about meeting our metrics? Let's look at the graph to the right. If I have a fixed set of bits, that's what I'm assuming there. I'm assuming there is a 32-bit standard CRC, which of course we are going to increase significantly. The bottom two parts of the curve are basically the fit rate, which is on the right-hand side. The right side y-axis is the fit rate. And fit is a very manageable problem, as I said, and you can see that the numbers are fairly good. The interesting part is the probability of retry, which is the two graphs that you see, one with single symbol correct, which basically corrects a single burst error, and the other one is two symbol correct, which corrects two burst errors. Now, if you look into the x-axis is the burst probability, which is the FBER. So if you look into 10 to the power minus 4 FBER, the retry probability of a packet is 10 to the power minus 2, assuming a single burst correct. Whereas if you move to 10 to the power minus 6, that retry probability, even with a single burst correct, goes down to 10 to the power minus 6. So the retry probability is it's a square of the FBER probability, which is what you would expect because it is that's the math, right? You're basically two errors you are going to cause a retry, and that goes as n choose 2. So you're going to get n choose 2, and so you're going to get a p-square effect there. So our approach can be summarized as follows. What we want to do is deploy a lightweight FEC, such as a single symbol correct, but with a strong CRC, and that way we want to keep the overall latency, including the retry, really low so that the load store applications do not suffer latency penalty. Stated another way, we are better off retrying a packet with a 10 to the power minus 6 or even a 10 to the power minus 5 probability. If I can keep my retry latency or my replay latency to less than 100 nanoseconds versus always paying effect latency in excess of 100 nanoseconds for every one of my packets. So that's the philosophy that we are deploying here. And for all of those, the key thing is that my FBER needs to be 10 to the power minus 6 or better. Megan, do we have a question that you want to take?
Yeah, the first question that we received is, I understand the trade-offs you're making here, but won't a higher BER give you more channel length? Have you considered that?
Yes, so that's a very good question. We have done extensive studies on that before going with a 10 to the power minus 6 FBER. As you have seen, and you will see more in some of the upcoming slides, that 10 to the power minus 6 is a critical number in order to meet the latency impact due to FEC. And we want to remember that we want to keep it less than 2 nanoseconds. We also want to keep our bandwidth overhead low. So that becomes the bottom line, right? So once we have that FBER, now let's see, if I relax that FBER and I go with even 10 to the power minus 5, then I need to deploy a much more stronger FEC, and that I cannot keep the FEC latency. It will be getting very close to what the networking side has. Now, based on our analysis, that we are very confident of getting to the existing channel reach, even with a 10 to the power minus 6 FBER. For longer channels, of course, we have retimers. Now, based on our experience over the last 2 decades, here is what we have seen. Channels, they always improve over time. We always come up with better materials with lower loss characteristics over time. And we have seen that time and again, over the last 2 decades. So channels will always improve, but once we make a target FBER, if we deploy an FEC or CRC, then what happens is that that's something that cannot change over time. Once you have picked your FEC, and let's say it results in 100 nanosecond of latency, that's not going to change. So we're stuck with it for the life of the technology, and that basically will make PCI Express not viable in a lot of the segments that it plays in. So I believe we have made the right set of trade-offs here, and yes, we have looked into relaxing that, and for us it's a non-starter. Now, there is another question that I'm seeing, which is that can PAM4 Gen 6 interoperate with NRZ in Gen 4? And yes, it will. PAM4 Gen 6 will interoperate with all the NRZ data rates, not just Gen 4, but Gen 5 before that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the promise of backwards compatibility. So people are going to have design the circuits in such a way that it can operate in PAM4 as well as it will operate in all those data rates that existed before Gen 6 came. Now let's take a look into the FLIT and what we are doing with PCI 6 in PCI 6.0 specification. Before we get started here, I want to say a thing about transaction in PCI Express. PCI Express transactions are variable sized. They are known as TLP, transaction layer packets. Okay. So let's say if you have a read request, that can be something like a 4D word long. And D word here stands for double word, which is 4 bytes. So a read request can be 16 bytes if you're more familiar with bytes, but 4D word. We generally go in D word increment because that's the basic unit in which everything moves. Whereas if you did a write, you might have 4D word for the header, but also you're going to have a variable sized payload. It can be anywhere from 1 D word to 1024 D word. So TLPs in PCI Express are variable in size. So far, from Gen 1 to Gen 5, PCI Express used a framing mechanism whereby the physical layer would demarcate where a packet begins and where a packet ends. Each packet individually is protected by a CRC. In the TLP case, it's a 32-bit CRC. So it does not matter how big your TLP is, you still have the same 32 bits of CRC. And the framing mechanism is another 32 bits. So, that's how PCI Express has evolved for the last 5 generations. Now with 6.0, we have to do things a little differently. Because we have to do a lightweight FEC, or FEC nevertheless, to get to an acceptable retry probability to deliver the performance, FEC cannot work on variable sized packets. So we need fixed set of bytes. So that brings us to the notion of FLIT, flow control unit. And it's there. FLITs have been there in other protocols for a very long time. Now, once you do correction at a FLIT level, it makes sense to do detection, which is through CRC at that FLIT level. And of course, then in that case, you are going to replay or do the retry, the link level retry at the FLIT level. So once you do that, then even though it is done for 64 gig in PAM4, once PCI allows you to dynamically change the data rates to the lower speed, so the lower data rates will also use the same FLIT once it has been enabled, because you cannot go back and forth between different types of replay mechanism. It becomes a lot more complicated, and FLIT has got some very good properties that we will see. It results in much better link efficiency. So once enabled, FLIT is always enabled, even for lower data rates. Now, the FLIT mode is, of course, a significant departure with PCI Express 6.0, and as you will see that it results in a lot better efficiency, because we no longer have per TLP framing, sync header, and separate CRC for separate packets kind of thing. We do the CRC and the FEC on the FLIT level. Now, in the FLIT, as you can see on the picture on the right, the first 236 bytes is for TLP. So you will see that bytes are numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. This is for a by 8 link. The first 236 bytes of that FLIT are for TLPs. It is followed by 6 bytes of DLP, which stands for data link layer payload. And it is used for things such as credits, ACK, NAC of the FLIT, things that you need in order to get the packets flowing, right? And ACK, NAC kind of things is what you need in order to say that, hey, I got an error in that packet, can you send it to me? Those kind of things. So those 236 bytes of TLP plus the 6 bytes of DLP is protected by the next 8 bytes, which is CRC. So the CRC is 8 bytes. So you can see that we already gave a much stronger CRC. And that CRC is over basically 250 bytes, counting the 8 bytes of CRC. And followed by that, in the layout, you have 6 bytes of FEC. Now, the first 236 bytes of TLP can accommodate one TLP, can accommodate many TLPs. If you have a very long TLP, it can span across multiple FLITs. So think of it as the first 236 bytes is reserved for the transaction layer. It has to send transactions. And because there is no framing, the transaction layer is responsible for stuffing with no op TLPs if it cannot send a useful TLP. The DLP, as we said, is a dedicated 6 bytes, out of which the first 2 bytes are dedicated for doing flit level, ACK, NACK, retry, handshake, and that's done to keep the retry latency less than 100 nanoseconds. Because you get a dedicated slot, you do not have to wait for scheduling a DLLP to send the message across, which can take up, in microseconds time. Now we went with 8-byte CRC because we really want to keep the flits very, very robust and fit really low. And with 8-byte CRC, we basically it can detect up to 8 bytes of errors in the flit. So practically nothing is going to get through this and alias. Now the FEC that we have chosen is an interesting one. It is 6 bytes in total, but it is a 3-way interleaved FEC. So each interleaved FEC is capable of correcting only one symbol or 1 byte in error. And that's how we basically take that exponential problem of FEC and make it linear and get to the low latency. So that's why each group has 2 ECC bytes, as you can see in the picture, ECC 0 and ECC 1. And the 3 FEC groups are interleaved. And you can see that because of that interleaving, if you can have a burst error, but that burst error, as long as it does not exceed 3 symbols across 24 bits, it's not going to impact the same FEC group in more than one symbol, and you're going to basically correct it. So that's what we did. And because there is, again, no sync header, no framing token, none of that, what we expect is the bandwidth utilization to be really high because we are amortizing the overhead much more efficiently. Now the flit latency, how long does it take for us to receive a flit? Clearly on the transmit side, I don't incur the flit latency. I can always pipeline things through. But on the receive side, I have to get the entire 256 bytes of flit before I can do my FEC correction and then CRC check. So it will be 2 nanoseconds for 256 bytes on a by 16 link at 64 gig, 4 nanoseconds for by 8, and so on and so forth. And because we got this first 2 bytes doing ACK-NACK and the next 4 bytes for doing credit exchange, this results in a very low latency turnaround loop time, and this will result in very low latency in terms of a replay, and also storage requirements become low. PCI Express supports go back and retry up until now. So what it means is that if packet 10 got corrupted, you're going to ask for packet 10 to be replayed. So not only will 10 get replayed, but 10, 11, 12, 13, all of them will get replayed. All the subsequent packets will get replayed. So that will exist, but it will be at a flit level with PCI 6.0. But in addition to that, we are doing an optimization where you can just ask only for the flit that was in error to be replayed. That way you are not going to replay the subsequent flits if the receiver can store the subsequent flits and then do the replay for itself. So this is an example of the replay scenario that we talked about. In this case, device A is sending the packets flits to device B. And you can see that flit number 11 got an error. So B could have asked for 11, for a replay of 11. A is just going to ignore because it didn't have any meaningful TLPs. And B will also know once it got flit 11 that 11 was not meaningful. So it's going to just ignore the fact it sent a replay request. But flit 13 had an error and it had meaningful TLPs. So it would have requested that send me 13 and send me only 13. So as you can see, after flit 16, device A is going to schedule sending flit number 13. And then it resumes back to sending flit 17, which it would have sent if they didn't have to replay 13. So in this case, what happens is B has stored 14, 15, and 16. So it can replay it for itself from its local buffer. The link doesn't get consumed by having to send subsequent flits. Now for an example again, in this case, we said, hey, 18 has an error, and after that 19 also has an error. So, but then this time B asks for replay from 18 onwards. So A will replay 18, but it's going to do the TLPs which were sent in 19 because 18 was only no op TLPs, and then it's going to replay 19, then 20. So it's going to do the go back end. So both mechanisms are supported in PCI Express. A device can ask for one at one time and then the other the next time. So let's look into some of the some of the metrics that we had and how well we are doing. The first one is around retry probability and fit. So you can see that the retry time, although we have assumed it to be less than 100, we have assumed 200 here just to get to some worst case scenarios. Then the FBER, which is in dark color here, raw burst error probability, that's we have given even 10 to the power minus 6 is the target, but I've given -4 and -5 also just for contrast. And then we calculate the retry probability per flit, which you can see is 5 times 10 to the power minus 6. And then the next one is retry probability over retry time. So this is the bandwidth loss due to retry. You can see that is 0.05%, even with a go back n scheme. And then the fit, which is the next circle that is round, that you see in red color, it's around 10 to the power minus 10, so it's close to 0. So we, as you can see, that with 10 to the power minus 6, what happens is that we are doing really, really well in terms of our performance metric, even with a lightweight FEC. But if we went with 10 to the power minus 4, you will see that my bandwidth loss would have been close to 5%, which is just unacceptable. Now let's look into how well we are doing in terms of the bandwidth loss or the bandwidth efficiency. So this is the first aspect of performance. One of them is bandwidth. The other one is latency. Now, with the bandwidth increase, I'm expecting to get 2x because 32 to 64 is double the data rate. So with that, we have to multiply the bandwidth efficiency of the flit mode and then divide that with the bandwidth efficiency of the non-flit mode. And if the flit mode bandwidth efficiency is better than the non-flit mode, then I'm going to get more than 2x improvement. If it is less, I'm going to get less than 2x. And recall that what we said was that we could suffer no more than 2% extra bandwidth loss. So I need to strive to be above 1.96 number here. Overall, and the numbers that you see here is for 100% read. This is where the device is doing only reads. 100% write. This is where the device is doing only writes. And then 50-50 read-write means the device is doing one read, one write of the same size, equal number of reads and writes of the same size. And the data payload is, this is 1, which is 4 bytes, 4 is 16 bytes, and so on and so forth, all the way up to 4 kilobytes here. Overall, you can see that there is a significant improvement in bandwidth, greater than 2x improvement. And then that efficiency increase drops as the payload size increases. And beyond 512 byte, the bandwidth efficiency goes to below 1, that's the reason why you will see it drops below 2. So intuitively, the way to think about this is that bandwidth efficiency improvement in flit mode is due to the amortization of the CRC, the DLP, and ECC over a flit, which was 20 bytes out of 256 bytes, because 236 bytes were for TLP. So that's an 8% overhead. That works out to be a lot better than when you consider doing a sync header 2 bits every 128 bits, doing a DLLP every so often, right? We have conservatively assumed that to be 2% here. In reality, it is between 2 to 5%. Having to send a framing token per TLP, having to send 4 bytes of CRC per TLP. So all of these, right, with this 8% amortization overhead, we work out significantly better than what we used to do before. And you can see that the effects are more pronounced when the packet sizes are small. So that was the bandwidth. Now let's look at the latency implications. For the flit mode, the latency that we incur is the accumulation till the last flit containing the last D word of a TLP, right? Because you really can use the TLP only after you get the last word of the last D word of the TLP, and then you have to still wait for the end of that flit. In the non-flit mode, it is just the accumulation latency till the last D word of the TLP. And we have presented two cases, by 1 and by 16. Basically, these are the two bookends. If you look into the two table, and you can see that the latency delta, which is the rightmost column, it represents the difference between what happened in the non-flit mode at 32 gig versus the flit mode at 64 gig. And if you look into the by one case, you'll start with somewhere around 12 nanoseconds, and it keeps, at some point it becomes negative, which means that the flit mode results in a latency improvement over the non-flit mode. And in the by 16 case, you will see that even in the worst case scenario, the latency impact is less than a nanosecond. Now, we expect, as I said, the FEC and the CRC delay to be in the 1 to 2 nanoseconds range. And we have done that through actual RTL code and synthesis, and sample RTL code is there in the PCIe 6.0 specification. It will show up there. Now, the expected latency savings due to the removal of sync header, the fixed flit size, there is no framing logic, there is no variable size TLP, DLLP processing, none of that are there, and those are not even shown in the tables here. And between those, I expect to get somewhere between 5 to 10 nanoseconds of savings that is not reflected here. So what you can see is that with twice the data rate and with all of these optimizations, realistically, I'm expecting to see latency gains. I might see some latency loss for the by one and by two, and which is fine. That is in the acceptable range. So in general, we meet or we exceed our latency expectations. So that was the performance side of the things. So let's take a look into what are we doing for the low power state. So existing PCIe low power states are pretty good. PCIe in fact offers one of the best power efficiency in the industry. Our available IPs delivers around 5 picojoule per bit, and we expect that to continue, especially as you can see that our all of our emphasis has been in terms of less circuitry, less of everything, just make sure that people can design a very low latency mechanism, make best use of all the capabilities that we have. So we expect that to continue. Now we also offer very deep power savings in idle mode using L1 substrates, where power consumption in the link has been single digit microwatts, so that's close to zero. So while we do really good in the two bookends, increasingly people have been demanding that their bandwidth consumption should be reflected in the power consumption. So ideally speaking, let's say if I have a link, a by 16 link where I'm consuming, let's say 2 watts of power, if I don't use that link 100% of the bandwidth, if my utilization of that link is 50%, can I get something close to 1 watt of power? And that's basically what we want to do, and we want to get there without interrupting the traffic flow. We have existing mechanisms like dynamic link width, speed change, those can do that, except that those transitions take several microseconds where the link is not available, and that's not acceptable for a lot of applications. So our solution is to come up with a new L0P state, and the L0P state is symmetric. It's symmetric in terms of the width in both the directions. Now with this mechanism, a link can support narrower link width, and you can go for a by 16 to, let's say, a by 8, by 4, by 2, or by 1 width. We will maintain at least one active lane, and that will continue to carry the traffic while the link modulation happens. And that's basically what enables us to not interrupt the traffic in progress. And we expect the L0P 5 power savings similar to that of L1. There is an example given here on the right hand side. DSP stands for downstream port. An example would be a CPU. USP stands for upstream port, which can be a GPGPU. So you can see that there is a query that gets initiated, and that's how you enable the L0P. It's an optional feature. USP requests to go to by 8 link. The downstream port says, yes, let's go to a by 8 link. And then in the next time they exchange the periodic skip ordered set, they're going to say that from now on, the link becomes by 8. That's a nice breakpoint for us to transition the link width, which is what we will do without interrupting any traffic whatsoever. So with that, you got 8 active lanes and 8 lanes in electrical idle. Now, if you go down, downstream requests the link to go up or go back to by 16, whereas the upstream is requesting the link to go down to 4 lanes. And in that case, the one that is requesting the higher width wins out. So we are going to, the upper 8 lanes are going to go through the link training and all of that, the full set of training sequence that exists. That can take, hundreds of nanoseconds to microseconds. While that is going on, the 8 active lanes will continue to send traffic. And when they are ready, they will again merge back with those 8 lanes again on the next skip order set interval. And then your link is going to work as a by 16 link, 16 active lanes. So L0P enables power consumption to be proportionate to bandwidth usage without interrupting traffic flow, and that's the key here. So let's look into how well have we done, right? We started off with a bunch of metrics. Now this is looking into, is it, are we there? Are we short? How are things going? So data rate, first of all, of course, we are going to meet 64 gig. That's not something that we will not do. Latency, remember 10 nanosecond latency adder, and as we saw in the 2 tables that I showed you, we exceed the latency targets. In most cases, we are getting savings, and of course, there are by 1 and by 2 cases where there is extra latency, but then that we expect to be in the 10 nanoseconds range. Bandwidth inefficiency, we said less than 2%, but in most of the cases, we are getting more than 2x bandwidth, and towards the higher payload, we are getting less, but still within the less than 2% number. Channel reach, similar to PCI 5.0, we expect that to meet. Power efficiency, it's design dependent, but again, depending on all the things that we are doing, we expect that to meet. And with L0P, you are going to get additional power savings also. Of course, we expect it to be fully backwards compatible with plug and play, and high volume manufacturing, cost effective, scales to hundreds of lanes, all of those are all expected to meet. So overall, we are on track to meet or exceed the requirements on all the key metrics. So conclusions and call to action. So PCI Express 6.0 is currently at 0.5 level. Ref 0.7 is in progress. We expect to complete the spec next year. It has been very challenging in multiple fronts. New signaling with PAM4, trade-offs around errors and correlations we are doing, channels, performance area, all the metrics that we talked about, and we talked about how we cannot really afford to do the extra latency like others have done, or even throw more number of bits at it. And then, we just need to continue to do the due diligence. Clearly, we are not past everything. We have not done through all of our analysis. We have done the significant amount of it, but we will need to continue to do the analysis simulations, test silicon characterization to ensure that we have a robust spec. Here is what I would say, right? We have the combined innovation capability of 830 plus members in the SIG. We have a track record of delivering flawlessly. We have done it for more than 2 decades, and I'm very confident we'll do this time also. And thank you for listening. If you have not joined PCI SIG yet, please consider doing so. It's an exciting journey, and I just don't expect this to slow down anytime soon. This will keep continuing. Megan, let's go with any questions that you might have gathered, or do you want me to read through them?
Yeah, so the first one, you mentioned that L0P provides proportionate power consumption to bandwidth usage. Can you explain why you are not supporting by 3, by 5, etc. widths, and why you're only supporting symmetric widths?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It basically boils down to return on investment and complexity. I mean, clearly, the way we have defined things, we could go, for example, with asymmetry. That will be an easier one to do. If I go with a different widths, for example, like by 3 and by 5 kind of things, then a lot of the properties, for example, around interleaved FEC, they need to be done differently. It's not that they cannot be done. You're going to have a huge mux structure and a lot of corner cases to validate. So, we think that, by 1, by 2, by 4, by 8, they provide with the right set of quantization. Those widths already exist. People have to validate those anyway for degraded mode. So it's just a question of the return on investment. An asymmetric one, that's a fair question. I can see like memory traffic, for example, can be more asymmetric. So, we can definitely do that in the future, but, it's the first step we are coming in with the symmetric, and definitely there is enough leeway in the spec, enough forward-looking things in the spec that we could easily intercept that if it is there. Okay, let's go through some of the other questions. PAM4 will use the same voltage amplitude. Yes, it will use the same voltage amplitude. Definition of failure in FIT is it's failure in time, and in this case, the failure is the number of times your CRC will alias. Because remember, once I detect a failure, I'm going to retry it and I'm going to correct it. Okay. So that's the definition. What frequency adopted to keep effect latency in 2 nanoseconds? This is, I'm assuming, a question around what is the internal frequency that we ran our RTL, and it's at 1 gigahertz. Flit size, why did we keep it at 256 byte? By the way, we looked into 128 byte. 20 bytes in 128 byte, your overhead goes up too much. 20 bytes in 512 byte, your overhead goes down from 8% to 4%, but your latency increases 2x. So at the end, it's all a trade-off, right? And we have looked into all of those. Can FEC be bypassed if the link is at lower data rates? Yes, you can bypass them, but another way to look at it is it might also give you some extra channel reach. So there could be some benefit, and especially given that the FEC fields are already there, you might as well take advantage of that. What will be the BER visible to the system after FEC, replay, etc.? So again, BER is a metric that we have, and that metric tells us how many errors we get, right? In reality, what is visible to the system is the probability of the retry, right? How much bandwidth you're losing because of the retry. That is the performance aspect that I talked about. And of course, the other aspect of it, which is the reliability aspect, which we really don't want to get into, and that's the reason why it is at 10 to the power minus 12, is aliasing, right? I mean, we really want the aliasing probability to be close to 0. How many lanes are considered for 10 to the power minus 6 error? No, it is independent of the number of lanes. It's based on the number of bits. The way FBER is, you take 10 to the power 6 bits, on an average, you are going to get 1 error. That's the way to think about it. What is a good TLP size to get maximum efficiency Gen 6 mode, given that the flit size is 236, actually flit size is 256 byte. So in general, the larger the TLP size, the better efficiency you are going to get. But yes, given that we are amortizing things significantly, your benefit for larger TLP size is going to be not as prominent once you hit something like a 256 byte or 512 byte kind of payload. You're going to taper off much earlier than that. Is 8-byte CRC different from the link CRC from previous PCI Express generations? Yes, this is a very different CRC. It is based on Reed-Solomon code and it's guaranteed to detect 8 symbols in error. Remember that this time around we are focused on correlated errors. So correlated errors are across symbols, and that's the reason why we went with the 8 symbols. So it is an x plus alpha square all the way to x plus alpha to the power 8. Right now we work in Galois field 2 to the power 8, both for FEC as well as for the CRC. It's no longer in Galois field 2. If the data payload is less than 242, is it filled by 0 instead in the flit? You can put multiple TLPs in the 236 bytes that are there. So no, you don't have to zero fill it with no op. You can put as many TLPs as you can within, of course there are certain rules, but within those rules you can put many TLPs within a flit, and a TLP can extend over multiple flits. Okay, so now DLPs can't be sent standalone, they need to be sent with TLP to populate a flit. So if you don't have TLPs to send, you will populate it with no-op TLPs, and DLPs will go along. So think of it as there is a train leaving the station every single time, and certain seats are reserved for certain category, right? TLPs get 236 seats, DLPs get 6 seats, so, and the bogie is going to leave the station every so often.
All right, sorry, that's actually the last question that we have time for today. So this recording will be available on BrightTalks and YouTube, and we'll also be uploading the slides to the PCI-SIG website. We received a lot of really good audience questions that we weren't able to get to today, so we'll also be working on a recap blog to answer the rest of your questions as well. Thank you, Devendra, and thank you everybody else who joined us today.
Thank you all and stay safe. Bye now.